It'd be great. It'd be great. So anyway, hello.
Hello.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, Maria. I'm Dr. Jodie Blackshaw from, I currently now live in Orange, New South Wales. I live in regional Australia, and I'm a composer primarily for the wind band.
Amazing. Can you tell us a bit more about like your background on your musical interests, anything like that?
To keep it really brief, I grew up in very, very tiny places. My dad, who actually, he was a school teacher and he actually taught in England for a while. He was around Reading, I believe. My grandfather was British, Blackshaw, of course, we're from Lancashire. He was in what we call, I don't know if you have them in England, 1 and 2 teacher schools. So an entire primary school that has 1 teacher in it. Australia is a vast country, and we are very sparsely populated in areas. So to enable students to be able to go to school and attend an actual physical school, they'd have these schools in the middle of all these farmland properties, and there would be 1 teacher teaching every child from kindergarten through to grade 6. And that was my dad. So then you're the family attached to that school teacher, and you're living in the school residence next to that school. So you have no neighbours, and everyone is bussed in. They come to school and then they all bus home again. So that was what life was like up until about the age of 11, when we moved into a town and had neighbours and all those kind of exciting things. But as a result of that influence on me is my very great need for space, a lot of space around me, physical and emotional space for when I'm being creative. I spent a lot of time in my own imagination as a child, and couple that with the fact that my very first instrument was one of those 2-tiered organs with pedals, you know, and drum beats and those kind of things. And that was my first instrument. It taught me how to read. It taught me about harmony and chords, and the placement of bass lines and where harmonies are and melodic lines. But more importantly, it encouraged me to play with tone color, because it had these little analog toggles, and you could have a little bit of flute and a little bit of oboe and a little bit of wah-wah, and then, you know, you had and then you could add some reverb, and you could add some, you know, vibrato or whatever, or tremolo it was called. But as a result of doing all of that and living in my imagination with headphones on and no one can disturb me, I spent hours of my childhood playing around with tone color blends. And I didn't realize until I did my PhD that what a profound influence that had on me as a composer. So I call myself a color first composer, in that I have to have the tone colors really aligned to the emotional intention of the work before the work will flow. Harmony will follow pretty quickly afterwards, and then a melodic line will kind of bleed out of all of those kind of ideas. But really, it's if the tone colors aren't there right at the forefront, like Rimsky-Korsakov composed the same way, so did Messiaen, then the work won't speak. So that's, you know, and that's where that's come from.
And I think that's especially actually true for wind bands, where you're missing the sort of the iconic strings and everything like that, that you have to play with tone color so much more to make sure it's balanced. So yeah, it's a really interesting perspective. I can definitely see it in how you write your scores as well. That makes a lot of sense. You've done some absolutely amazing work making these databases of underrepresented composers, and both with ACP and just as musicians in general, loads of us I'm sure would want to ask, how did you go about researching people to fill those databases?
Well, at the time that I started this, it was around 2017 that I started the female composer database. At the time, I saw there was a bit of a discussion on a social media platform about works for women. And I was really surprised at how few women people knew. They always brought in the big names, the Anne McGinty, the Julie Giroux, and every now and then my name would come up, but usually just for one piece, and that piece was Whirlwind, because it was attached to the name of a very famous composer, Frank de Kelly. It won the inaugural Frank de Kelly composition contest. But that's why people knew that piece, because they trusted de Kelly and they trusted his judgment, so they trusted my piece. However, there were very few other women that would really be brought to the surface. So there were some other people in the space in America doing some really, I'll just put my dog down. Say a quick hi, Dougie. Say hi. Yeah. There were some other people in the United States doing some work at the same time. So I feel like I was kind of part of a movement. There was Rob Deemer, who was doing things with the Institute of Composer Diversity. And that started with a bunch of databases put together by a young man whose name just escapes me at the moment, which is just absolutely terrible because he's made such an invaluable contribution. Anyway, it might come to me. So I decided that what I wanted to do was create something that was a little bit more accessible for conductors, because these particular resources that these other people were putting together weren't linked to the works. So they give a name of a composer and maybe name the work, and then you might go to that composer's website and half an hour later you're still troweling through the website trying desperately to find the piece. And what do conductors need in an instant? What do they want in this instantaneous society that we live in, this age of information that we live in? Conductors want to see a score, they want to hear a recording, they want to know a little bit about the work, and if they've never heard of the composer, they want to know a bit about them too. And then they want to know, yay, I like it, I want to buy it. How do I buy it? They need that information in about 5 minutes, probably 3, maybe even 2. So, so I started creating these databases with pieces where I could provide direct links to all those things. Information about the composer. You could get a direct link to a score, to a recording. You could contact the composer if you needed to, because chances are how you bought the music might change. So better off to just directly contact that composer. So I started with composers that I had met and reached out to them, and they sent some works to me. And I think to start off with, it was maybe 25, 30 pieces on that database, because it's incredibly time hungry, putting in all the links and doing everything. And then gradually over time, pieces grew, and those same composers recommended other composers. And then I put on my website the opportunity for women composers to send me pieces. Now, I want to make it really clear, not every piece that's sent to me makes it to that database. It's not just a free-for-all, and there's nothing wrong with the free-for-all databases. The beauty of diversity is we all hear things differently and appreciate and value things differently, and that's wonderful. But for me, I had one criteria for being involved, for having a piece on that database, and that is that the composer had a voice. I wanted a composer that had a voice, not a composer that sounded like a bunch of other composers, or that was following some of the very rigid regulations given by certain publishers. I actually wanted them to have a considered intention in the music that they were writing. And that was what I was looking for and still look for. So, so every couple of years, I reach out to all the composers. And something I want to do this year, and I know I've actually made time for it in my timeline, is some of the pieces have now been there since 2017. And what I'm going to ask, instead of adding more works, I'd like to keep it at around that 200 level, which is where we're approaching. What I'd really like them to do is refresh and put in some other pieces and say, oh, well, in that time I've written these other pieces and I love those. So I'm going to take these ones out and I'm going to put these other ones in, and we'll just do a refresh of what's in the database. Otherwise, it's too big and it's too overwhelming, and people go, I have no idea where to even start. I can't even start. I don't even know what to do. So that's where we are.
Yeah,
colourful music is not the whole thing, but yeah, let's go with that one.
Yeah. I mean, like the windrep.org page is amazing for finding loads of repertoire, but it's so big that sometimes trying to narrow it down takes hours, and then you end up just clicking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of names. I've been there too many times trying to find something, and then not all of them have recordings, not all of them have a way to buy the music. They're just listing the composers, which is still in its own way really useful, but it's a very different kind of useful. It's a more research-based rather than pragmatism sort of thing. You've described your own musical experiences as being based in colour and movement, and also that seems to be reflected in also what you value in music, in terms of you want people to have a voice. So other than in terms of your own personal sort of your preferences, how would you say that your thinking about colour and movement has impacted how you work as a teacher and how you work as a composer and educator?
It's in everything that I do, mostly because I think it's because of the way that I started teaching, which is that I was very much a free spirit. I hadn't done any formal training in teaching, but my grandmother was a teacher and my father was a teacher, and I'd lived in schools. Schools were these incredibly familiar places to me. So I felt very free, and I felt very open, and I felt very ready to share my whole self whenever I was in a school. It took me a few years to realize that not all children were like that. And it was in the year 2000 when a friend introduced me to this remarkable pedagogy called Schulwerk, that I realized that what I was doing in this very haphazard way had actually been ordered and put together by two remarkable people, composer Carl Orff and the dancer and choreographer Gunhild Keetman. And they had, over a period of 70 years or so, put together this incredible pedagogy for teachers. And when I did the first level of Schulwerk, I knew instantly that this was for me. Orff is the only one that uses movement. Dalcroze, of course, is all about movement, but it's Orff that really incorporates movement with solfege, with this whole, incredible approach that gives the child all of these tools and all of these skills to then realize themselves in a creative way. Carl Orff was all about, he wanted every child to see the world and experience the world of music through the eyes of a composer. And I am exactly the same, which is why it was such an alignment. But it took me many years to actually realize why that alignment was there. The cerebellum is at the base of the brain and sits at the base of the neck here. And it's when we move, that cerebellum is feeding our brain with a whole bunch of information. Hence why we have wobble stools and things for kids when they're in class. And not to be too gender specific, but a lot of boys, that's how they gain that information. So let's take that and now let's think about what we do in band. What do? We give them an instrument and tell them to sit still, be still. Here we are playing music that makes you want to do this, and we're telling them to do this. I'm doing this, I've got my clarinet hands out. It's ridiculous. They need to move, they want to move. So we need to create spaces that enable them to move, that give them permission to move, that make it safe and emotionally safe for them to move. And there's lots of ways to do this that still create a disciplined environment, because we are asking those children to find self-discipline at this time. And if we do that in relation to the music that they are playing, say I do this in my work, Bella Sun Woman, it's all structured. There's lesson plans, there's everything, and it can take you through a program. But what the students are doing are actually doing this movement to recordings of the music that they are about to perform or about to read for the first time. So instead of their first impression of a piece of music being this page with all these, squirts and squiggles on it, and them sitting there and freaking out, and it can be quite a fearful experience, we actually give them a scaffolded approach to this, and that starts with movement.
Yeah, it's so important to think about movement in music, and there are some really obvious things and the very scientific things, such as the use of the cerebellum, but it's such an interesting phenomenon to me that there are so many musicians I know who say they can't dance, or they can't clap in time, or they can't tap in time, and I'm like, why? What do you mean? Yes. These things shouldn't be separated. I think Adam Neely mentions it in a video essay about music theory in the white racial frame, and saying that why are we making jazz musicians do continuo? It would like it's not applicable, but there are more useful methods of like understanding the root of music, and in some ways that would potentially be dance. And whereas in, for example, some Southern African countries, if you took in a music exam there, you'd be expected to have to dance in order to be able to partake in the music. Why isn't that a thing? And then you get this compounded problem where people don't know how to move in a controlled way, so their movement becomes extraneous to what they're doing rather than integral to it. You get so many like feedback of so much feedback of professional performers and examiners saying, oh, this person moved too much and it was clearly nervous movement rather than intentional. But it's because people haven't been given those tools to move intentionally. So yeah,
I couldn't
really
agree with you more. And if we think about nearly every orchestra before Mendelssohn, you know, or even just before the classical movement, a lot of those orchestras were in circles. They actually didn't sit, you know, in semicircles and face an audience. They were in circles. They were facing each other. They needed to face each other so that they could communicate while they were playing, and that movement was there. There's quite a lot of research about the impact, and this is not to be negative against the church in any way, but when people started really going to church and sitting in churches, it was to sit still. So that the music that became a big part of their lives, and maybe the only time that they really participated in live music making, was in church, and it was at a time where we needed to be still and structured. So it's many hundreds of years in some ways for some cultures that being still with music has been demanded upon them, you know.
And then you look at gospel choirs that are so joyful, and even in the more sorrowful music, there is still so much movement involved, and that's just integral to the performance and to the practicing of that music. So in light of all of this discussion, you're thinking about with children, but if you're thinking about with adults or students or people who may be used to sitting still, how would you recommend incorporating movement into rehearsal?
I do a lot of mirror movement to start off with. So we'll do something slow and accessible for everybody, because we do need to think about capability and movement ability. So what I like to do is break the ensemble apart so that everybody is an individual, and they're just doing mirror movement with me. So I am the leader and they follow me. And then what we do is we create ensembles of just two people. So people work in pairs, and they're mirroring each other face to face, or they're mirroring each other front to back. And they're exploring different textures. They're exploring different lines in the music. So they're listening to different things and they're communicating to each other, but they're doing so through movement and in a completely non-verbal way. So then once we've done that, we put them into diamonds. And those diamonds are either facing each other face to face, or they're front to back. So we grow the ensemble. So they're no longer thinking as a pair. They now think in a group of 4, and then we go to a group of 8. And then once we get to a group of 8 and they start to get a safe vocabulary of movements and gestures that they all know that they are comfortable with, we then add story. So then we give them a short piece of music, and we encourage them to create, if you like, a real-time animation and build story. But that story still needs to respond to elements of melody and harmonic changes and rhythms and the tempo and the textures that are in there, and how much can they show that in their movement. And when I take groups through these kinds of workshops and have them develop and grow and move in there, different leaders emerge in those groups, and people who hear things differently, and people who are more rhythmically inclined or more harmonically inclined or more melodically inclined, all start to intertwine and all start to blend, just as they do when they're playing on an instrument in an ensemble. They're just doing it in a completely different way. So we're ensemble building, and then we transfer those movement skills into what they're doing as performers in an ensemble.
It's something that is so often lost, like the actual art of ensemble performance, but separately from music. And I've sometimes tried to do that with the wind orchestra by having sectional pieces, so they're thinking about working in smaller sections, but it's still really difficult to build that when a lot of people haven't had the chance to play chamber music before. And something that is sometimes lost with people who have only ever played in a conducted ensemble is that you forget to listen to each other and to look at each other and to communicate with each other, and also to trust one another. You don't have to always look at the person straight in front of you, although it's preferable if you do sometimes at least, but you can often look to your section leader. You can, if I say, oh, flute and oboe, you're playing together here, look at each other, don't look at me, I'm not important here. But it's so difficult to build that trust in a purely rehearsal musical setting, and in fact doing something that's more like more sort of physical, but in a way that doesn't require any technique, but instead just requires trust, is really, really lovely idea.
Yeah, and well, trust in yourself. Trust in yourself to share something of yourself. It's extremely vulnerable. So we're asking people to be extremely vulnerable in a workshop like this, which is why I like to have the music very loud, which is why it needs to be in a space that feels large enough to move, but not too large that you feel a little bit intimidated by it. That's why I don't like doing it in performance spaces, because if you're in a performance space, there's a certain level of expectation of how to behave in that space. So it can make it really difficult to break that down. I know I did this once with a middle school band in Chicago, and they'd never done any movement before. And we couldn't be in their regular band room. So we went into their cafeteria, what was their cafeteria, and they cleared all the chairs and tables. And what do students do when they're in the cafeteria? They talk. So the moment we got in there, they couldn't stop themselves from talking. It was just this talk. It's like, okay, let's keep it down. And it took much longer than it ordinarily would, because they already had an expectation of their social behavior in that space. So it's, to anybody who wants to try this, there's so many parameters and so many things to consider in terms of what space to do it in, how many people you've got in that workshop, what sort of sound equipment you've got in that space, to make sure that if the music is too soft and people have to strain too much, they're going to feel exposed. So really loud music will make them feel, that's why people go wild at rock concerts, isn't it? Because they're completely wrapped up in the sound, and it's dark usually, so you can't see. So
I find even as a performer of very loud music, as soon as sort of everything feels like it's the right atmosphere, you really let go, and it's a really lovely experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the kind of atmosphere we're trying to create. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, having that safety is so important before we're really going to do anything creative. So that's something that we've got to really build those needs into those spaces before we start taking risks and doing wild things like, oh gosh, what do you mean we're not using our instrument? What do you mean? I need my instrument. I need my chair. I need my music stand. I need my set, and then I'm comfortable. What do you mean you're taking it away?
And it's important for conductors as well. I did a conducting course at Girton with Denise Ham and loads of other sort of brilliant conductors. And one of the warm-ups we did in the morning was on the grass in nice weather, sort of just doing not even actual beating patterns necessarily, but just particular movements, and just sort of about 30 people all stood on the grass with like no music, no podium, nothing. It felt like doing Tai Chi. It was both really relaxing and also like so meditative, and really felt like that embodying was so important. But yeah, we're really looking forward to working on Peace Dancer. You've written some like really interesting and extensive program notes, but I was wondering if you could tell us more about what brought you to writing it, and what would you say are the biggest challenges with playing it, and also what did it mean for it to be included for the National Concert Band Festival list?
Okay, well, to start off with, it was commissioned by a consortium that was pulled together from a conducting symposium. I did a video call with my good friend, conductor John Lynch, who was in Australia at the time. He was one of the conductors for the University of British Columbia Conducting Symposium, which was run by Dr. Rob Taylor at that time. And I zoomed in, and they were doing one of my works. I don't know what work it was. And I was pretty cheeky. I think I was pretty cheeky that morning. I like to stir people up a bit. So we had a really, really fun morning, and we talked about all sorts of things, and it seemed to resonate a great deal with the Canadian conductors that were there. And they said, oh, we really want to commission a piece from her, and did something that doesn't happen very often, and actually created a consortium from people who were there at the conducting symposium. And they wanted a lot of music from me. So 3 works came out of that consortium. One is Lessons from Mother Earth, and another one is something that really set me on a whole brand new trajectory, a piece called 13 Moons, which is for composing pieces. In other words, I give you all the building blocks, and you as the ensemble create the piece from that. And then the third piece was Peace Dancer. So Peace Dancer, one of the criteria, if you like, from the symposium was that they wanted it to have something to do with First Nations, and preferably to resonate with the First Nations education principles of Canada. And I'm very sensitive when I do any work with any kind of First Nations materials. I'm not First Nations, so I wanted to make sure it was extremely respectful. So there was a list of books that are used in schools in Canada that were all First Nations authors. And I know that when works are already published by First Nations people, then there has been a level of approvals that have gone through there. So then when I found that, I then sought moral rights from the author of Roy Henry Vickers, and was back and forth with Roy Henry Vickers quite a bit during the creation of Peace Dancer. He was very, very generous with everything. He gave us permission to use a page from the book as the title of the score. Yeah, it was really quite extraordinary. So let me see if I can find it quickly. Can I find it? I think I can. Yeah, here it is.
It's a beautiful score as well, as in the cover.
That's all Roy. That's got nothing to do with me. But this is the beautiful book. And I'm not sure if you've seen the book or been able to get the book and seen all the gorgeous images, but this is the image that really comes to mind, because I wanted Peace Dancer to capture a moment in time. I didn't want it to be something that's a linear thing. I wanted it to capture a moment in time when all of these thoughts go through your head. And it's this moment of, I've had a vision. I see our return home. We have really lost our way. We have not taught our children love and respect. And, I had all of these different kind of brainstorms around, I could have done this whole sort of programmatic piece and had a storm and had all of these things come out of there, but none of it felt right. And it wasn't till I had that realization. And then I did an improvisation. I've got a synthesizer with 16 tracks on it, and again getting the colors right. But in this instance, I actually started with a solo flute and acoustic guitar. That was the color, this very fragile color. And as I say, the very first thing starts here in the ice blue. The very first color, those muted trumpets and those things, that all starts in the ice blue. And then from here, we move into this creamy color, and then we start to warm up a bit with the blues. And then we sort of start moving this way until it's like we're zooming out more and more and more. And it's just this kind of idea that and I think the ice blue gave me that idea of being frozen. And it's that feeling that you have when you realize that you've just said something to someone you love and you realize you've really cut them, or there's something that you've done and you have that I now call it my Peace Dancer moment, where you go, oh, come on, I'm better than this, and you feel gutted. You feel really, really, really disappointed in yourself. and you go, okay, I'm going to have to face this, and I'm going to have to step up and own this. And that's what integrity is for me. Is really facing it and being vulnerable enough and being honest enough with yourself to just go, yeah, this is not good. I'm not, not aligning myself with my moral values, and I've really hurt someone that I really love, and I don't even know why I've done it. And that's what the work is all about. It's I had no idea that Peace Dancer was going to be performed as much as it has been. I've been very proud of the wind band world for taking such a risk on such a vulnerable and delicate little work. But it has been performed a lot and has continued to be performed, which is wonderful. I didn't even know about the National Concert Band Festival. I don't know much about bands in England. I think I need to learn a bit more. And then to look on the list and see that it and Vulnerable Joy are both on there was wonderful to learn that it was there. But by the same token, and I'm going to say it because if we don't say it out loud, then it doesn't get heard. I looked at the 550 entries that are on that list, if that is indeed how many there are, and I'm very disappointed to say that only 15 of them are by women. And out of those 15 works that are by women, there's 2 by me, there's 8 by Julie Giroux. So then there's only 5 left. So that means that there are only 7 women composers represented in total, and not one of them, Maria, is British.
Yeah. It is a massive shame. I mean, NCBF is an amazing opportunity for so many bands, and it's amazing that we even have this database of, again, all of these pieces. And the thing is that we know we can do better. There are some amazing female composers and women and underrepresented composers who are British or in the UK, and it's so important to have them more represented. So we're very, very glad that your piece is on there, because I trawled for many hours trying to find more pieces that we could do that I felt represented the values of the orchestra. But I have 2 questions to ask that came in what you're saying there. One of them was just out of curiosity. Do you have synesthesia?
I think I have synesthesia in a way of, it's probably more texturally aligned than it is to direct colour. I don't hear music and see colours. I know when I was talking about Peace Dancer there, that's kind of how I approached it. But if you think at the moment, I'm doing this work at the moment, and it's for a remarkable school, and they have right in the centre of this school this enormous Indigenous artwork, and the artwork represents the community of the school. And it's one of the things I've been given permission to just respond to, but I'll show you a little sample of what that looks like.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Isn't it extraordinary? So that's one half of it. And the other half of it is here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And
so what I've been doing is I've actually been experimenting. What I've really found, I've got this whole new appreciation of Indigenous art, because I've realised the depth that is in there, and that is representing time and place and societies. And so I've been doing some different things in exploring these colours and seeing how I can layer them and seeing what movement I can create, and how do these colours blend, and how do I get everything on one page in one idea, because it's only a 6-minute work. This is, a 25-minute work in this artwork. I've only commissioned a 6-minute work. So, what do I do and what do I focus on? So I've really been looking at things like that or I've been just experimenting with smears,
Wow.
real smears of things, and how to create those smears, and sort of what happens, when and what colors dominate, and so I start really looking at things like that, and then I will improvise, and then I will start improvising, and I keep improvising over the same material until I reach a state of flow. And that means that I stop thinking about harmonic rules and, the melody needs to go up and have this shape and all those things that are just so ingrained in us. And I just forget about them all. And I make sure that I'm speaking truth from whatever it is that I'm trying to respond to. And I actually surveyed the entire band. It's a high school band, and most of them are year 11 and 12. So, 16 to 18 years old. And I asked them what their school means to them. And so out of that, I've created this hierarchy of words that really came out of, that really speaks about what that is. And I'm aligning that with what this is. And I've completely forgotten what your question is. Oh, synesthesia. You're asking about synesthesia. So, yes. I think I need all of these things to have the music speak. When I'm listening to music, yes, I'll maybe feel things and things, but I don't see a direct, main color. Like Messiaen even wrote on his scores dark blue and, all these kind of things. I'm not like that. I think I'm a little bit more Rimsky-Korsakov in that I just really think about tone colors right from the very beginning of my work. I don't write something and orchestrate. And there's a lot of people who think that that all composers orchestrate. I don't. I go straight to full score. I don't have short scores. I go straight to full score because I need the color blends. We talked about this before. Wind ensembles are a beast of an ensemble to write for, and to really get blends, and to really smear through the ensemble the way that a work like Peace Dancer does, then you can't be writing in short scores. You've really got to think of all sweeps of color across the whole ensemble right from the very inception of the work.
I know completely what you mean. I mean, for me, partly from being synesthetic and also just in general from my musical experience, like there's something, the sound of something, the melody, the harmony, whatever, is intrinsically linked to the timbre. And I love orchestrating from piano scores. I have to do it for my exams, but I think when I'm writing my own things, I also do the same thing. I have to go straight to the full score because I can't make it work in a short score. It just doesn't feel right. It sort of suddenly feels mundane and it doesn't feel authentic. And I think sometimes this notion of using color, and not just figuratively, but literally, so you're painting to understand something better in order to write for it. That's something that I think is often lost in music education. The idea is that you do all the technique and you have to be doing music. If you're not doing music, then it's not being productive and it's not helping you as a musician, when actually some of my most formative musical experiences have been things that had nothing to do with my instrument and were just experiences that I was having and things that I was thinking. And I'm sure many people relate to that. The other very brief question was just...
I love this whole thing of, it's you're not being productive. Oh, you've got to be doing something, you've got to be... It's like, why can't we're just stepping sideways. I am being productive. My husband comes home from work and says, oh, what have you done today? Oh, yeah, I've been working on my piece. Oh, have you got anything to, play me? Because he's a musician as well. No. I've been painting today, and I've been, and I went for a drive, and, I went and did some recordings in nature, and I went and did this, and I went and did that, and all of these things. I know I call it my Dr. Seuss moment. Dr. Seuss, you can read a book, but there's so many things happening all at once educationally when you read a Dr. Seuss book. And I know that I'll reach this pinpoint when everything I'm trying to say and all the colors that I need and everything that I want will all happen at this moment. And then I know, right, now we've got a piece. Okay, let's get on with it. So then you do the hard work of plugging all the notes in.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was just also going to ask very quickly, so Peace Dancer ends with the orchestra, almost everyone singing rather than playing, and I was wondering why you chose that.
I was, when I was doing my PhD, the remarkable composer Chen Yi came.
We played Chen Yi, sorry, very excitingly. Yeah.
Wonderful. Did you play Spring Festival?
We played A Suite from China West.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So she came to my university and did a remarkable talk, and she had a piece that she had written for a girls' choir. And there was this color in this piece, and I thought, oh, I love that color. That's so fragile. It's just so fragile, but it has a resolution to it like I've not encountered. I thought I really want to use that. I was writing Peace Dancer at the time, and so decided that I really wanted to incorporate it in some way. And to I'm not a big fan of works that end, with a bass drum. Boom. Sorry, Holst. Well, it was all right. Holst did it before anybody else did, but there's millions of works out there that end with these, this big, it has to be, again, we've got to be productive. We've got to go somewhere, and it's got to be big, and it's got to be loud. And it's like, no, I'm trying to break apart the canon around wind band works that says that everything has to be loud. I'm tired of walking out of wind band concerts because my ears hurt. They just make my ears bleed because all the works are so loud and they're so aggressive. So while I was writing Peace Dancer, it wasn't just that I heard this vocal work and wanted to have this vocal line at the end. I was also trying to write music that you wanted to put on and listen to as a recording. That it was something that you wanted, that when it came to wind band music, you didn't want to alienate all the people who love chamber music. You wanted them to fall in love with what we love about wind bands. We wanted them to see the beauty in all of those incredible blends of all of those people on stage, and that it doesn't have to be aggressive, and that it doesn't have to be abrasive, or it doesn't have to hurt. So I was exploring all of those things, and voices are just a natural extension of wind instruments to my ears anyway. So it seemed to make a lot of sense to do that. Sorry, there's my cat is meowing, and I don't know where she is. Oh, sorry. She's
got a whole menagerie coming through.
Indy, where are you? I don't even know where she is. She's hiding. Anyway, yes, but yeah, voices are a very natural extension of wind, and I had this idea that things had to dissipate, because after you've gone through that intensity of feeling with what Peace Dancer represents, it does start to dissipate, and you do feel lifted. And for me, that is the essence of growth.
Yes.
What has happened is you've just experienced some growth, and so these female voices just resonating and just disappearing in a haze is exactly what I thought was necessary here, because it's meant to be a moment in time. It's not meant to be something that is punctuated or comes to an end. It's something that has become woven into the fabric of who you are.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting hearing you talk about you want the wind orchestra to not be aggressive, because a lot of the times I've had a lot of fun playing music in wind bands, and that are fun to maybe listen to and sing along with friends, have been the marches and the really big aggressive things. And those are really good fun. They absolutely have their place in the repertoire, but there are so many of them. Whereas actually, I think the most emotional things I've ever felt with, other than for sentimental reasons, the most emotional I've ever felt conducting and playing wind orchestras have been the quieter pieces, the more meditative pieces, and the ones where you have one crescendo in it and it feels like your world is crashing down around you because it's so impactful in the context of everything else being quiet. Like the middle movement of the Vaughan Williams folk song suite is a really one of my favorite examples of that, really. But yeah, so thank you for that. So you have a conservation series dedicated to music and conservation in general, and we were wondering if you approach writing those works any differently to other works, and how did you choose the charities that you support through that series?
I think it's a similar approach. My approach is a very linear approach in that I need to get the big idea down, and that's a lot of research. So Invulnerable Joy, which I see as another work that's on the NCBF list, it's about the mother whale and her journey to have her calf and the extraordinary feat that she just does as part of her life, which is she goes for 9 months without feeding. And this is, she has her calf, she's feeding her calf 900 litres of milk a day. Yeah, put that in context, while she's not feeding. So she's had a baby, she's now feeding it this enormous amount, and then they have this enormously long journey back to the feeding grounds, whether that's in the Northern Hemisphere or the Southern Hemisphere. It's the same kind of distances that we're talking about, thousands of kilometres. And she has to protect that calf, and she's teaching that calf how to navigate during that whole time. And she's a single parent, you know, the male's buggered off. So, you know, so in Vulnerable Joy, I really wanted to learn as much as I could about this mama humpback whale. And I did this enormous amount of research, and then decided that I wanted to share what I had found because it was so extraordinary. And I thought, if people are really going to get behind this concept of artistic citizenship, then they needed to feel passionate about what they were playing about, and it needed to resonate with them emotionally. That's not only going to impact the music that they play, and so then the music has to mirror that in a way, but they then also are informed. They're informed performers. That's why there are QR codes on every part in the conservation series, as well as on the conductor scores, and you scan those and it takes you to a website, a page on my website, and it gives you videos and all sorts of other information. You might get word clouds in there of different words to help you respond emotionally to different sections in the music. You're informed about what is going on and what the state of play is for these particular species. So that has been my approach. And in terms of the charities, I actually try and avoid the really big charities that are heavily dominated by administration costs. And for example, with Vulnerable Joy, the royalties that I've earned so far that I'm donating have been donated to a huge research platform based in Queensland here in Australia. And I know that the music is going directly to postgrad students who are researching certain things about the whales that are travelling and what they're doing. And really that research is so vital because that research feeds politicians and it feeds other movements. So I'm trying to get into that grassroots research area, being a researcher myself and having been through the grueling PhD process. I know that those students need as much support as they can get. So so it's there. And we also, I've adopted a whale. And I haven't put that on the website, but that's something that we do, and that provides direct. It's one of those sites that I think 80 or 90% of what you donate goes directly to the upkeep and safety of. They're still wild animals, but they're tagged, and they keep an eye on them and see make sure that they're safe. And again, that tagging process feeds research. So that's what I'm really looking for when I choose who will benefit from the royalties.
Yeah, I was really happy to see that there was this idea of having conservation with music, because it can feel very difficult to try and include, or trying to bind them together. And then also a lot about music production, music performance can be inherently environmentally unfriendly or removed from nature because you're in the concert halls or you're having to print loads of music, and it's sort of, there's always a part of me that feels slightly bad. So it's really lovely that there's a way to kind of offset that at least a little. And actually, just as a personal question, I was going to ask, do you know the piece Earth Cry by Peter Sculthorpe?
I most certainly do, yes.
Yes, adore that piece.
Yeah. Peter Sculthorpe is, he's very color orientated as a composer, very strongly followed by melody. And he was one of the first. I mean, we grew up with him as music students, listening to Peter Sculthorpe. So he's an extraordinary voice who said right at the end that he thought that all he ended up realizing what he was doing was writing English pastoral music, which is very interesting, because I think he did so much more than that. And if you haven't heard his work, Kakadu, and how he takes sounds from the landscape and sounds from the fauna in the landscape and translates that to instruments, that's also had a very strong impact on me as a composer.
Because we played it in the youth orchestra I used to play, and our conductor is an absolutely amazing character, an amazing musician called Andy Sherwood, and he told us the story that he first listened to this piece while driving to a rehearsal, and he had to like pull over to cry because it like impacted him so strongly and so emotionally. And I remember when we played it rehearsing without the didgeridoo, I thought it sounded cool, but I didn't really understand it. And then we heard it with the didgeridoo, and the guy was walking and playing, and oh my God, it was a struggle for me to concentrate, because I was like, it was just a sound I'd never experienced before. And it's an amazing piece. Anyone who's watching this or reading it later, please check it out. Please listen to, of course, all of Jodie's work as well. You mentioned before about doing these workshops and things like that with movement and things like that, but also doing workshops on your pieces. And we were wondering if a workshop has ever revealed anything about your work that you had not heard or thought of through it before.
Oh, always. I mean, that's the sign of a good conductor, isn't it? That they pull something out of your score that you didn't even really consider yourself, or the approach, the perspective. I'm absolutely fascinated by perspectives, especially musical perspectives. So I get asked some really interesting questions at times, particularly from middle schoolers, kids who are 11 or 12 who don't hold back and hit you with the sledgehammer. I think my favourite thing is, and if you look at the teaching performance through composition element of my website, which again, that's me being the Karl Orff person of the wind band world and trying to give students the opportunities to think like composers. You can start in the scaffolding process by teaching students a chant, a rhythmic chant. You apply it to body percussion, just like you do in offshore work, and then you play it on something. For me, my favourite thing is to bang chairs with drumsticks. Because chairs, especially if they have wood and metal or plastic and metal, have colour, and they have all sorts of different kinds of colour. And getting students to compose with structure and with timbre and with texture and with expressive techniques and with rhythm and with tempo, and they do all of these things before you add pitch. So they have all of these composition experiences. So, you can't just poo-poo that, they're just banging chairs with drumsticks. They're actually doing a lot more than that. And I've been teaching music like that with, younger musicians for 25 years plus. And I'm still absolutely astonished that teenagers will do something different with a chair and a set of drumsticks that I've never seen before. And it still happens. Sometimes they come out and they're wearing the chair, or they're holding it in some crazy way, or they've been able to create a sound out of it that I didn't even know could be possible. I'm sorry that I haven't got this extensive line of recordings of all of these different things that kids have done with chairs, because it just is no end to their creativity. Absolutely no end. And last year was it last year? Year before? It might have been the year before. I was in Vietnam, and we were doing some stuff with some of my composing pieces. And this boy wanted to put bass, clarinet, and trumpet together in these particular registers to play this sound. And it was a colour I'd never heard before. And I'm actually just using it in this piece that I'm writing right now. So I guess I just love it when people take things at different tempos, because tempo is so personal and it's so linked to emotion. And they take things at a tempo, and initially I go, oh, no, that's not the tempo. But then I decide to be quiet and really listen to what it is that they're trying to achieve. And sometimes it's, I hear something completely different in this music. as a result of change in tempo. So yes, surprised all the time. That's why I love coming and doing things in person rather than via Zoom. That's why I love in-person experiences. The world of Zoom is like just a whisker of what can be achieved when we come together in person.
I mean, I absolutely agree. But then saying that, when all of the orchestras I was in went online, we had a few times of experimenting with making sounds, and we would be going into out meetings of like 4 or 5 of us and then go back in, and then we'd say we found this sound on our instruments. And actually something that I think composers often, but not always, have more of than perhaps only instrumental players or instrumental musicians, is that you have this idea of play, that you're looking for new sounds. And I think that's something that's often lost in a lot of traditional music education, is this idea of play and having fun and like just experimenting, just moving around and doing things that feel silly, and then you do them actually like, oh, actually this is such a cool sound. And often some of the most interesting pieces and some of the even the most famous pieces came from experimentation and came from doing something silly and ridiculous and having an idea that you couldn't get out of your head. And also,
yes, and that's been lost, but to make way for, we have to be working. We have to be working. We have to be working. Well, we are working. We're just doing something else. And it's this, and it's also this idea that we can't fail at anything, that it has to be right from the beginning. Whereas we can try an idea, and I'll be doing some of these teaching performance through composition things, and a student will say something and you'll go, that's never going to work. And you go, and you don't say it, you go, okay, let's try it, and you try it. And that student loves it. That student loves that sound. And so then you look at them and you go, you know what? You've just found your compositional voice. Yeah. There's your unique perspective on the world, and there it is. Write it down, pursue it, get inside it, and open it up. And you know, that's why we look for different composers.
I could talk about this for hours, but
yes,
I'm very aware of how early it is for me and how late it is for me. So what work or project are you proudest of? And I'm aware that that's probably an impossible question to answer, but you might be able to.
Yeah, it's really hard. I'm really proud of the Teaching Performance Through Composition series, mostly because it was about a 20-year journey to get there. And it wasn't till I started studying neuroscience and its application to education and really started to getting my teeth inside how we retain and store and then retrieve information as humans, that that I really started to appreciate that we needed to change the way that we were teaching music in ensembles, and how important it was to give time and space for experimentation and to allow students the opportunity to realize what doesn't work and what does. So it took a lot of, and I failed a lot. I did. I failed I tried many different models that just failed. It just really didn't work. They didn't make sense. They were messy. They were too complicated. Things had to be pared right back and had to become much simpler. And I know it closely aligns with your Schulwerk approach, and I'm not surprised, and I'm very proud of that, because if you know that pedagogy, then this is something that aligns with what you do. I'm obviously very proud of my conservation series. I'm a bit disappointed that more wind bands don't consider what they could be doing from an artistic citizenship perspective, and that even just once a year they could be doing something to really open up their audiences. So much of the wind band canon is a little bit alien to audiences. It's not played on radios. It doesn't really appear on Spotify or on their Spotify. And a lot of the time it's not music that translates to recordings particularly well. There goes my dog. So when we really think about that, how can we reach our audiences, and how can we make the music that we play in our wind band concerts really resonate with our audiences? And I really think that is where the role of artistic citizenship really comes into play, and that is writing pieces and performing pieces that really say something that's particularly prevalent for the audiences. The one I'm thinking of is a piece called The Little Bush Buddha. I'm not sure if you are aware, but the Australian koala is highly endangered. Yes, you're protecting me. Thank you very much. Is highly endangered, and it's quite possible we see the end of it in my lifetime, and I'm 54. So it's that bad. So I wrote this piece, and it's a protest piece, and it's a grade 2 protest piece, and the school that commissioned it, they performed it in an area that is very close to a lot of forests and areas where koalas are, and their numbers have declined dramatically. And the band struggled with it. It was a very different kind of work for what they're used to playing. But the message was so strong that there were people in the audience and they were weeping. They were wholeheartedly, and the school talked about it for months, and it probably had a much greater impact than anything that band has done in their community before. And that's because they did something with purpose. And I know when I've visited bands and they're playing those conservation works, the majority of players say to me, it's so good to be playing music that is saying something and is attached to a movement, or it's just outside of ourselves. We're stepping outside of, we're not just playing something about, a canyon or a mountain range, or, or something that's, just a little bit meaningless. It actually really says something. And I think we underestimate what our players are looking for, and I think we underestimate what our audiences are looking for.
Yeah.
So it's a really big tangent that I went on just then.
No, it's so interesting.
I'm proudest of, but yeah, that's I'm struggling to write pieces that aren't in that conservation series anymore because they mean so much to me.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many pieces as well that I've played that have a political movement behind them, not necessarily a sort of more of a protest, but things like, I mean, Shostakovich Just 5 as an example, or the big band chart Fables of Forbes and other, like, there's so much protest music in jazz, and when you play that as a big band or as a quintet or anything like that, it feels so raw and so purposeful, and that's really important to have in music as well. And so to wrap all of this up, and sort of to aid of the Alternative Canon Project and everything that we talked about, we were just wondering what advice you would give to people who want to spread alternative canon composers and music in general.
Number one, my key message: stay focused on the music. Let's make sure we don't just focus on what the person looks like. Let's stay focused on the music. For me, I love this Alternative Canon Project. I really love this, and I think it really aligns with a lot of my research, which shows that there are colour first composers, there are texture first composers, there are melody first composers, harmony first composers, rhythm first composers, and they come in all sorts of shapes, sizes and colours and cultures. And if you realize in yourself that, oh gosh, I am melody first, I am all over it, everything I am all about is melody, guess what? As conductors, you are going to be erring towards music that is melody first. But you might have a band that is full of people who are texture and colour first, and they actually might be getting a little bit tired of the repertoire selections. So if you start thinking about looking at, and again, if you go to colourful music, I've got some examples of composers there that have this. But musicians are clever people. Just start listening, and you'll go, oh, I can totally tell that this is a colour first composer, or this is a texture composer. There's no melody in here. Is that a reason to not perform the work? Is that a reason to not dive into it just because it's not to your particular taste? You might actually have 5 people in your band that go, yes, finally, a decent piece of music, So stay focused on the music, really look for alternatives in compositional approach. And maybe if you don't like it for the first time, don't discard it. Yeah, give it a chance, because it might not be performed very well. Maybe somebody hasn't handled it particularly well. Look at that website we were talking about before of all the female composers from Europe who have written works for wind band, and there's virtually not a single recording there. Try and look past things. Try and give things the same chance that some of the most well-known voices have had, because them getting lots of performance opportunities, lots of workshop opportunities, lots of commission opportunities with really high-grade ensembles help them to develop the voice that you trust today. How many composers have we lost because we haven't given them that chance to be played, rehearsed, and performed at the highest level? But first and foremost, stay focused on the music.
Yes. All right, well, thank you so much for your time. It was really lovely to hear you. And anyone who's watching this before the 7th of March 2025, please do come and listen to Peace Dancer, along with so many other wonderful works with the Oxford and Cambridge University Wind Orchestras. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.